It's season 8 premiere of the Football and Other F Words podcast. I am your host, Zach Lyons. You can follow me on X/Twitter at FWordsPod. We got Stoney Keeley joining us today. And guess what? Big news because Mike is usually here, but of course he scheduled that. This is what Mike does. He picks the time and then he never makes the time. So we had to move on because we scheduled other stuff a couple of days ago, both of our schedules. So we've had to move on. But this will be until one of us gives up on football life. A three-man show going forward. We're back to a three-man show. It'll be myself, Stoney Keeley, and Mike Herndon for the remainder of the Football and Other F Words podcast. We wanted to start off in April, season 8, heading into the draft. And who better to have on than Stoney Keeley of the Sobros Network, of StackingInbox.com, a man that wears many, many hats, even though he only wears one in real life. But he has many hats in other ways. But Stoney, how are you doing? Talk to the people as your first official hosting, not really hosting duty, because we're all co-hosts. I kind of consider it, but as an official member of the F Words Pod tripod.
Man, it's kind of wild to be here. I remember listening to you guys years ago, you, Mike, and Lebowski, and thinking this is the best Titans pod on the market. Thinking that this show is exactly what I wanted my podcast to be modeled after. The way you guys are incredibly intelligent. You're ball knowers. Everybody knows that. But the casual way that you kind of guide the conversations, the fun that you have along the way, I've always been a big fan. So to be here is kind of surreal. But I'll be here as long as you guys will have me, as long as the people like me, as long as the people want me. That's like you said, until we just give up on football altogether. Like I'll ride this thing till the wheels fall off.
Well, to be fair, most of the people don't like me. So
Oh, is that it? Is that it?
what the people like do not always get. So whether they like you or not, you're sticking around. It's really up to me and Mike if we like you or
Fair
you
enough.
up on football life. I mean, listen, how many hours? Tell the people tell the people why you are the probably in this media, I think the most underrated, but also the most dedicated ball knower when it comes to the draft. Because how many hours have you spent on your now 222 plus big board that will be
Yeah,
going up
yeah.
at snackinginbox.com for paid subscribers? How many hours have you dedicated into your big board?
Well, I got to thinking about it because I was talking to Rooster, my co-host on Phone It In on Sobros Network, and I was telling her like I'm unusually stoked for WrestleMania this year, and I think the reason is because I'm looking forward to a couple of nights to just kind of sit down and forget about football for a little bit. We still have 3 weeks to the draft, but I've been like running really hot over the last 3 months at this point. So I got to thinking about my process and doing the math. And I'm like, okay, I usually watch at least 3 games per prospect that I write an eval on. There's like 100 more that I like a cursory overview of, but I don't count that because I didn't sit down to watch a game specifically for them. I'm like 222 prospects, 4 games each. It takes me like 30 minutes at the quickest to an hour at the longest, sometimes several hours if I'm doing a really deep scouting report. On average, about 45 minutes per game times 4 games per prospect plus the 30 minutes it takes to write the actual report. I'm doing all this math, and it came up to about 740 hours total on my big board, and I've been working on it for 9 months at this point, and that averages out to about 20 and a half hours per week that I've spent on this, on top of running Sobros Network, on top of having a
That
day job.
that
And
is a full
I'm
month
tired.
worth. Let me tell you that is 30.88 days. So
Yeah.
30.8 days. You have dedicated a full month of your life to the NFL draft.
Yeah. And I'm not
So
done.
I just want people to know that like it is do not I just have a hard time. Most of our opinions align anyway, but for the most part I have a hard time disagreeing with most of your assessments because they're in line with what, in the games that I see on certain prospects and all that. And we kind of agree on what we value in prospects.
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Mm-hmm.
just interesting. 30 the amount of work you put in amounts to a whole calendar month.
Like, I'm counting down, if I keep this 20 hours per week going into the draft, that's 60 more hours. I can get to 800 total, and then I can just call my draft guide the 800 hours.
I like it. The 800 hours. Well, that's enough horn tooting and humble bragging, because we got to toot the horn of Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, Tennessee, our sponsor. They're the best sponsor and an amazing sponsor because they give us the alcohol that we need to get through 30 days of draft prospecting and all that kind of stuff. I need you all to go and make sure that you have signed up for the Bluegrass Beverages newsletter or the Sinkers Beverages in crowd to make sure that you are getting up-to-date information, but also you can get the link to the draft party, which we'll both be at. And it's going to be a special draft party. I don't know where we're at ticket-wise right now, but I'm sure tickets have continued to sell. It's a fantastic event. It's going to be even bigger and better this year. So make sure that you are a member of Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, Tennessee, a liquor store that's been around for over 50 years, award winning. There's a lot to get to because in the last few hours or last day and a half, L'Jarius Sneed is at a press conference. Ren Carthon has a press conference. L'Jarius Sneed contract numbers have popped up. And, of course, they were immediately wrong when they were released this morning, and I picked up on it. And people thought I was overreacting. Then it turns out I was right. I'm always right. Just everybody just needs to deal with it at this point. And then the Texans trade for Stephon Diggs, and then Mike drops an article over at paulkarski.com, and I'm trying to get and write my article for paulkarski.com as well. And there's just a lot going on.
There
a
is
lot of discussions, a lot of hypotheticals, a lot of things to really look at and dissect. And I think we should start with the Stephon Diggs trade. The
Let's
Bills just wanted to get rid of him.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, they got rid of a cancer in the locker room, supposedly, because you don't trade Stephon Diggs, who is still a viable number one top tier receiver out of, like, if you're in the league, but you don't trade him while losing $3 million in cap space because of the trade and only get back a 2025 second round pick. That's it.
Yeah. And I think the move, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I was just going to say Khalil Shakir, and I like Khalil Shakir, and Curtis Samuel are your wide receivers 1 and 2 going into you got Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, but I mean, that's what you got as Josh Allen. And I think this says a lot more about Stephon Diggs and his attitude in the locker room and where they have trended towards the last few years into a dysfunctional franchise, but also shows they kind of wasted. They didn't really waste it, but they never achieved what they could achieve with the Josh Allen rookie quarterback contract. So there's a lot of like little facets and avenues to take on this trade. What was my initial reaction was Bills are trading or trading up for a wide receiver. Now I don't think that's as realistic, but it's possible. And the other one is that the Texans are really pushing the envelope of trying to build a dream team that rarely works out. Maybe this is the one that does.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway for me was that Buffalo got to a point where the talent was no longer able to compensate for the attitude. And if you've watched this Buffalo offense the last 2 seasons, really, I mean, going back to 2022, there's been something that's just been a little like wonky with it. It didn't click the way it did a few years ago. And I think Buffalo is kind of looking at this as like, we got to get rid of the malcontent. Like this, the shenanigans are no longer worth having the guy around, but also doing the fire sale even before the Stephon Diggs trade and all the mass exodus of talent from that roster kind of feels like something you alluded to there. This window of Josh Allen's rookie deal is kind of closed, and now Buffalo is being forced to kind of take a step back, recalibrate, and figure out how they're going to retool and rebuild this roster. I think, all things considered, we could see a bit of a step back year from the Buffalo Bills. And the Houston Texans, That's a good question, Josh. How much of a shitbag does Diggs have to be? Yeah, that's what we're all wondering here. But from the Texans' perspective, I think they kind of realize that they have struck lightning in a bottle here because their sexual predator quarterback that they traded for a fortune kind of put them in position to accrue all these draft picks and slumming it up with Lovie Smith for a couple of seasons, get some high first round picks, and now they seem to have to quote our buddy Easton Freeze, hit like a 500-foot home run on the rookie quarterback deal. It's like
Easton's had a good day of tweets.
Easton's
I mean,
been
I
dealing.
don't like giving Easton compliments.
Yeah,
but I will say that
he's been
today he
dealing.
has had a good day of tweets.
Yeah, so I'm looking at what the Houston Texans are doing as a massive sense of urgency to strike while the iron is hot. You've got CJ Stroud for a few more years for next to nothing, comparatively speaking, to other quarterbacks. Like you go at this point. It's like batten down the hatches. It's all hands on deck. We're going for this thing right now. Now, whether it works or not, I don't know. Remains to be seen. I'm not really that high on Stephon Diggs anymore. I kind of think he's past his prime. I joked on Twitter that Stephon Diggs was nothing more than Tank Dell insurance, and we're going to run with that for the time being. So I don't know. We'll see, but a massive trade nonetheless.
Well, here's a few of the Bills' moves and the cap savings. This just came out with Spotrac, so this is really good timing. They traded Stephon Diggs, lost $3.2 million in cap space, which, by the way, they only had $7.6 million in cap space at the time before this trade. They released Tre'Davious White, but that doesn't come as a post June 1st, and they'll save 10.2 later on. So there's where the kind of balances out, right? They're going to get $10.2 million in cap space later on. So they'll be roughly around 14 million. Then you take off your draft class, right? So it's not that bad. Then they renegotiated Von Miller's contract, who did nothing last year for this team.
Getting old.
They released Mitch Morse, which was saved him 8.5. Renegotiated Dawson Knox's contract, released Jordan Poyer, released Nyheim Hines, released Deontay Hardy, released Sierra Neal, traded Ryan Bates, and that also doesn't include letting Micah Hyde go. They didn't bring him back. I mean, this is where people are going to argue that the salary cap doesn't matter constantly. You always have those people. But this is where, if you don't make the right moves, you're now Josh Allen gives you a lot of leeway, gives you a lot of high ceiling as a quarterback. But that was also with Stephon Diggs on the field. That was also with Gabe Davis on the field. They've lost both those guys. I mean, are you transitioning to a run-first offense, which may work? But we've seen Josh Allen without Stephon Diggs. It ain't that pretty. No. Now, he's a different quarterback than he is now. But it's a good viewpoint, right? The Bills on a second contract with the quarterback. The Texans are on the first of a quarterback. And the Texans are trying to duplicate what the Bills did. Well, what the Bills did not earn them a Super Bowl, by the way.
Yeah.
It earned them some early round exits in the playoffs. It's just, it's cashing. And this, I think T. Patton is correct.
Yep.
The Texans are cashing in on making moves now while Stroud is on a rookie contract. Simple as that. Yeah. And I understand all of that move. But rarely does this kind of influx of talent, cohesiveness work out, right? Because what are you going to do with all these defensive linemen you've signed? Are you just going to play 10 up front and have one cornerback, Derek Stingley, out in the backfield?
Yeah.
How's Bobby Slowick, Mr. Drywall Paint, going to handle Stephon Diggs when Nico Collins is getting all the attention? And listen, that is a statement from Easton that I'm totally ripping off. But I agree. I mean, Nico Collins is the number one wide receiver. Stephon Diggs is now the number two. And can we all remember what happened with Julio Jones in that trade that was right here? And this is Stephon Diggs in a similar situation. I And I think a lot of people have said this, and you know me, I'm not a national media guy, but I do find it funny signing Calvin Ridley is met with such vitriol, and then trading for Stephon Diggs, a malcontent wide receiver on the wrong side of 30, is like, oh my gosh, you guys are the best franchise ever. And again,
Yeah.
it comes down to just people love D'Amico Ryans and CJ Stroud. And I don't blame them. I
Mhm.
don't.
Mhm.
Where does this Stephon Diggs, traditionally not very good against L'Jarius Sneed.
Yeah.
He hasn't scored a touchdown against Cheeto either. So you
Mhm.
got two corners right here that he has not stacked up well against. Where do you fit is the Stephon Diggs trade? Here's ultimately what I'm trying to ask. Is the Stephon Diggs trade really that big of a needle mover like everybody's acting right now?
I don't think so. I mean, I still look at that Texans offense and I think, man, you gotta lock down Nico Collins and you better have somebody on Tank Dell because the way Bobby Slowick kind of schemes Tank Dell open and they use him as that chess piece moving around the formation and getting open down the field, great release, great deep speed. That's terrifying because that's the matchup where I think like, okay, you have Sneed and you have Cheeto on opposite sides of the field. I'm not really worried about Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins as much as I am. Well, what's happening with Tank Dell in the slot against Roger McCreary? I love McCreary's short area quickness, but man, if Tank Dell can get by him, that's a big play waiting to happen. That is still the thing that scares me the most because unless they move Diggs around and put him in the slot and all this different stuff, and he ends up with McCreary one-on-one in those situations or one-on-one with the safeties or the linebackers, that's a matchup that maybe he can exploit. But I just don't think he's still the guy that is going to line up outside and beat a guy in press coverage one-on-one like L'Jarius Sneed or even like Cheeto down the field to make big plays. Now, it may make me eat my words come this fall, but I don't know, man. I see him as more of a complementary piece than the alpha dog at this stage in his career.
Yeah, that I think that's the big key. And you're also relying on, and listen, if anybody can avoid this, it would be CJ Stroud, and Bobby Slowick, but you're also there's a lot of tape open
Yeah.
on now available for both CJ Stroud and Bobby Slowick, and I'm be anxious to see how teams adjust and how they're able to adjust on the fly because I think that I wouldn't bet on it. I think, I wouldn't bet on it for CJ Stroud, but I would bet
Yeah.
on it for Bobby Slowick that there is a visible, tangible sophomore slump.
Mhm.
But it'll be very interesting to see. I mean, we're also forgetting they've added Joe Mixon, but he's not that great either. I mean, they've added kind of a bunch of older players that have name recognition, but don't have that they're kind of on the wrong end of their career trajectory. So and here's better at this stage in their careers, Hopkins versus Diggs. I think last year showed you that Hopkins is better. I
I
think
would say
he
so
was
too.
saddled with the worst offensive line, a worse quarterback. And I think that they don't throw the ball enough. And I think that the advanced metric, I'd be very surprised if the advanced metrics didn't tell you, based on what I saw with my eyes, that Hopkins wasn't better. Now, sure, Diggs may be the better separator, but Hopkins is the more reliable catcher. He's the guy that you can trust to be not, disappear in games as long as he's being targeted, obviously. But I mean, you look at what Diggs did against L'Jarius Sneed last year. He was 0 for 5 against
Yeah.
L'Jarius Sneed. What good is that? I mean, he just totally gets disappeared and blanked. And I don't remember Hopkins getting blanked by anybody. He was more often than not catching that ball when it was thrown his way.
Yeah, and a layer that I would add to this discussion is that at the more advanced ages in the NFL, I think if you're comparing DeAndre Hopkins to Stephon Diggs, it's not just a matter of pure separation, but it's how they separate, right? Stephon Diggs, always known as like a speed guy. DeAndre Hopkins is more of the savvy route runner that can kind of, sell you inside and break outside, and he's suddenly running free 5 yards away from the cornerback. I'm going to take that dude that isn't relying on the physical speed at his age before I take the guy that does rely a little more on the pure speed. Not saying Stephon Diggs is not a master craftsman route runner or anything like that. I just think that his game has always been a little bit more dependent on that speed and athleticism. And I think when you can get open without having to rely on that, like DeAndre Hopkins did in 2023, I think that's, I'm going to roll with that before I'm going to roll with Diggs.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you right there. Okay, so the Tennessee Titans, though, like I said, have the Diggs kryptonite in L'Jarius Sneed,
Yes.
and he spoke to the media on Tuesday, which was yesterday. Did you get any kind of sense or any kind of information from it that you thought was interesting? Like I'd like to, compared to the other press conferences that we have been put through
Yeah.
by some of the new additions, it was definitely one of the better ones. Um, and he did say the knee is not an issue, but I think every player is going to say that, and I don't think it's that really big of an issue anyway.
But then he followed it up with, I know what to do with my
Right.
knee. So it's like, there's
And I
nothing
think
wrong there, but I know what to do with it. I'm like, well,
right.
hold on now.
Yeah, see, that's the thing is like why end it right there. So maybe that's the thing that we can kind of latch on to right there. I mean, we obviously know that he's a shadow corner. He can move around. He could shut you
Yeah.
down. He
Mm-hmm.
can gut through the pain. He's going to play. He's going to be reliable. But the big question will always surround the knee issue.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some kind of knee issue. Now, PK was on Robbie and Rexroad, and he mentioned it last week as well, but he had talked to people at the owners meeting in Orlando. And I think he said about 6 people he talked to. It kind of always brought up the knee issue, whether that is, it's a degenerative knee issue, but you don't know any information beyond that. That could be a knee issue that pops up in 10 years.
Yeah.
But if he knows how to load management or load manage it, that's all that matters. As long
Sure.
as the Titans understand that. And I think Iran Carthon said something to that effect that, they'll have a plan in place. Hell, they've been talking about the analytics for injury anyway, about all this kind of stuff. I don't think practices are going to be as hard on the body of the players as they were last year. So, what are your concerns on the knee issues? My concerns are very minimal. I know Mike Herndon's are very minimal. And this isn't really just a case of, well, he's now with the Titans, so we're just going to throw it out the window. That's how it was with Julio Jones. And I think for a little bit, because we kind of ignored what the Falcons were saying and telling you. But I don't think that's the same. I don't think this is the same situation because the analysts over at Kansas City, for the most part, have kind of made it a non-issue.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's the big thing for me too, is that nobody in Kansas City seemed too worried about it. L'Jarius Sneed doesn't seem too worried about it. The Titans are obviously not too worried about it, or else they wouldn't have given him all that money. His play on the field did not appear impacted by any sort of injury with a knee. He might have missed the practice here and there, but didn't miss any games. And I would also take the opportunity. It's kind of like the Tyjae Spears conversation from a year ago, to just remind people that you have very short windows in the NFL. Yes, it is ideal to think that, oh, you're going to have this lockdown cornerback for the next 5 or 6 years, and why would you give him all this money and get stuck with a guy that has questionable knees or anything like that? But if you can get like 2 to 3 good years out of this guy, and it helps with this window for this team building around Will Levis, I'm fine with that. Like I really try not to get caught up in some of the long-term conversations regarding players in the NFL, because it's just anything can happen, and it's so often that we see guys kind of flame out in situations like this. So it's, again, kind of strike while the iron's hot, get this guy while he's still in his prime. If he fizzles out later, no big deal. I just would caution people on thinking about this deal in terms of the long term is all. I'm not worried about it, to be clear.
Well, and you shouldn't be, because if you look at how the deal was constructed, even though it was reported this morning that $51.5 million was fully guaranteed, that was obviously wrong, because the numbers just do not make sense in my head when I'm reading it.
Yeah.
And after 2 seasons, right? Let's say that he has some knee issues, and after 2 seasons, you want to call it quits, and you've only paid $44 million. As long as you make that decision before the 5th-day league year of March 2026. And then let's say you write it out for one more year. Well, if you write it out for one more year, that's only going to cost you $21 million in salary cap hit, right? In 2026, when the salary cap is going to be insane. But if you cut them, okay, if you cut them, you save roughly, I think it was like $16 million if you cut them after 2026. If you cut them or after 2025, if you cut them after 2026, guess what? It's still about $16 million. So there is cap savings there, no matter where you want to look at. Sorry, $11 million after 2025. But there's cap savings there either way. So you've given yourself now 2 outs. If he has issues these first 2 years, and he may not have the issue the first year, but he may have an issue the second year. And if that's the case, you've front loaded the contract in a way that, if that's the case and he has issues all through 2025 and your medical team says, okay, it's now time to cut bait, you're good. You're perfectly fine. The contract compensates for any concerns any fan should have on the knee issues, barring some catastrophic injury that is pretty much out of everybody's control. Could be, that may not even be tied to a degenerative knee issue.
Yeah.
It could be an ACL tear. It could be a clavicle bone. It could be a rib breaking or something like that.
Might get caught racing on the interstate in a Corvette.
Yeah, there you go. You could do all kinds of stuff. But to me, I'm with you. It's a very non-issue issue. And again, it's very easy to say that now because he hasn't suffered an injury. But from the way that the Titans have talked, from the way that he has talked, from the way that other people have talked about it, it may be like not Tony Pollard. It may be like a Tajay Spears-esque ticking time bomb, but it may not be for another 4 or 5 years before that time bomb explodes.
Yeah, and if it happens then, who cares?
Right. Who cares? Because you got ways to get out of the contract built in after the first 2 years. Okay. Ran Carthon talked a lot yesterday, and I was pleasantly, it wasn't announced that he was going to talk, and I was pleasantly announced that he popped up there. And I hope local media satisfied could put their pitchforks away, put it in long-term storage, their pitchforks and their torches and everything, because he actually talked to you guys during the off season. So hopefully, no hit pieces are coming out soon.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up too. I'm glad you did.
Yeah, but I do think that he's getting more comfortable in his press conferences. Sure. Obviously, when he's allowed to not have to cover for the owner, the press conferences go really well. And I thought that he had some interesting things to say. One of the takeaways was discussing the right tackle.
Okay.
And he was asked, do you think the right tackle's or do you think you have the starter on the roster? Is phrased a little weird. And Ran Carthon kind of got cheeky with it, right?
He did.
He said, well, if you ask me, if you say that today, I mean, sure, there's someone starting at right tackle.
We're going to put 5 guys out there.
They're good. Yeah, it doesn't mean that they're good, but they're starting. We have 5 starters that can play if the game starts today, but it doesn't start today. Yeah. And this isn't really about the draft. It's about free agency. But he talked about the depth of free agency or the depth at right tackle or tackle in general in the draft.
Yeah.
And we have mentioned a couple of times, I wouldn't be that upset if they went tackle in the draft. I really wouldn't.
No, and especially in like a trade back scenario where like they can slide back and get a Fuanga, get a JC Latham, and then double up on like a Patrick Paul, or even wait until later and get our boy Travis Glover, who they were kind of sniffing around at his pro day. I think it's a good year to actually need 2 tackles.
Yeah, I agree. Now listen, because I want to get your opinion on this, because I think I'm going to have a different opinion than a consensus. It feels like.
Okay.
But let's say that they don't grab 2 tackles, and they do end up, because of just how either the draft falls and free agency falls, how the rest of the offseason falls. They they're going into a battle with NPF and Jalen Duncan for right tackle. And maybe John Ojukwu. You could throw John Ojukwu in there. Am I the only one that thinks that Jalen Duncan is going to win that battle? Because I feel like everybody's kind of written Jalen Duncan off, and I feel like Jalen Duncan is a guy with such athletic upside and such he's almost a blank slate. He wasn't coached in Maryland. He wasn't really coached for by the Tennessee Titans. And it feels like when for purposes of trying to relate this to maybe a job, if you're in sales, most people that are hiring for a sales position are going to prefer a candidate that has some experience, but not so many bad habits.
Sure.
And I kind of feel like NPF has he's still got the ability, still got the talent, but I kind of think Jalen Duncan under Bill Callahan, I think could take NPF in this battle. Not saying that that's a good thing or anything, but I feel like if it came down to Duncan versus NPF, I think I'm putting the money on Duncan, and I feel like I'm the only one.
No, I'm right there with you. I mean, I was super high on Jalen Duncan in his draft class because I saw the athletic traits and I watched how in real time at the Senior Bowl when he was getting actual valuable NFL coaching, seeing him improve little technique things that, they spent a lot of time with him. And it's kind of like Tyler Guyton this year, where like the raw skill set, the potential is there, but he's got to iron out some of the consistency issues. And I thought in real time, day over day over day, Jalen Duncan was doing a good job of absorbing the information and putting it into practice, right? You didn't see them coaching him up on things Thursday that they were also coaching him up on Tuesday. Like it was pretty cool to watch. Like Tuesday, they're working on his hand strikes, his hand placement, and then Thursday they're working on footwork and stuff like that, just to use an example of that. So I was high on Duncan to begin with. I'm with you. I kind of sat quietly as everybody just completely shit talked Jalen Duncan throughout his rookie year, despite the fact that rookie offensive linemen often have a difficult time to begin with, even
especially
the
sixth
first
round
guys.
Rookie offensive lineman.
Yeah, and the situation that he was thrown into, and then like you said, like I think it's fair to kind of call into question the previous regime's offensive line coaching, because just what did they do with the lump of clay that Jalen Duncan is? And I think reading the tea leaves, man, I don't know. It could all just be a smokescreen leading up to the draft or whatever. But the fact that Jalen Duncan and NPF's names keep coming up from Brian Callahan, from Rand Carthon in press conference makes me think that they probably will be content with those two guys battling for right tackle in a worst case scenario situation. So if that's the case, and it is between those two, I think NPF probably has higher quality experience starting at right tackle. But man, the upside is with Jalen Duncan, and I'm not ready to give up on the guy just yet. I still think he can be a player in the NFL.
Well, Jalen Duncan has shown, because you've heard Duke Manyweather talk about it and stuff like that. I mean, he is a guy and you saw it at the Senior Bowl firsthand too, but he's a guy willing to put in the work, willing to be coached.
Yeah.
I think he has some dog in him, because I see someone else said earlier that they don't think he has dog. He's similar to Radens, doesn't have dog in him. NPF doesn't have dog in him to me. NPF and Radens have a similar mentality than Duncan. I think that last year it's hard to evaluate Duncan, and everybody's so quick to write him off that I'm not ready to write off Duncan, but I'm also being realistic, and I think you are too, in the sense that Duncan is a worst case scenario. Like both Duncan and NPF are worst case scenarios. Now, I mean, obviously there's injuries and stuff, but realistic worst case scenarios, those are the both too. But at the same time, this is what you bring in Bill Callahan for, right?
Exactly.
You take a worst case scenario and maybe make it an okay scenario.
Yeah, and that's the thing, man.
I mean, you're not asking, like, nobody, and I think this is where there's some levels of disconnect about the Bill Callahan conversation. And I talk about this in my article for podcarsky.com. But there's some people that think like, well, Bill Callahan is God. He's going to take Jalen Duncan or Dylan Radins to turn them into
All-pro.
all-pros. And there are some people who are like, well, Bill Callahan can't do shit with anything other than the first round.
Sure.
Let's meet in the middle.
Mhm.
And that's what I asked. Let's meet in the middle.
Yeah. I think go ahead, finish your
Well,
thought.
I've been battling a cold, so I'm taking some longer pauses than normal.
Okay.
So here's my thing with this is that what Bill Callahan does can make Duncan or NPF, maybe Dennis Kelly, maybe
sure.
David Quessenberry, right? Like, I mean, that's what you're talking about. If he turns them anything more than that, that's just gravy. But your level of expectation is capable starter. Okay, that's what it is. It's Jalen Duncan, NPF, Dylan Radins could turn into capable starters. Does not mean that Bill Callahan is going to turn them into all-pros. Does not mean it should be the plan that you ignore those spots because of what you have with Bill Callahan. It just means you feel or attack those spots differently. Because that takes us to a subject we're going to have later, but it's like, everybody's like, you have to draft Alt. You have to draft Alt. You have to draft Alt. And if you don't draft Alt, you're idiots. But isn't the whole point of Bill Callahan, if you miss out on Alt for one reason or another and you have to draft Olu Fashanu, well, isn't that what Bill Callahan is for? Isn't that why you all wanted, including myself, Bill Callahan?
Yeah.
So why is it that we can't find that middle ground, Stoney? Are we the most reasonable people in Titans media?
That's a firm possibility for sure. But I think there's another layer to this that you haven't even mentioned yet, and it's the fact that this team in 2023 was catastrophically bad along the offensive line because they had two bad tackles. Neither tackle played particularly well. And so what kind of a jam does that get you to from a personnel standpoint? Because you can't line up, you can't take 4 tight ends out there and help both tackles out on every play, right? So let's say they do check the left tackle box, and maybe it is Joe Alt, but maybe it is like a Patrick Paul, who I personally think we're kind of overthinking collectively as draft media. If it's
There's
Patrick
a lot of
Paul,
overthinking going on.
Well, touche. We're 3 weeks out from the draft, so tis the season. But if you can just kind of eliminate the need to help out one side, and maybe your right tackle can be helped a little more, maybe that gap is still pretty significant between the two, but at least you have one side of the line locked down and you are a little freer to help the right side a little more consistently. I think you can marginally improve the offensive line play in general, and that's just like, that's good. That's a good thing. So it is one of those scenarios. By selecting and solidifying one position, you are helping others as well.
Okay, look at it this way: Bill Callahan is not here to turn Jalen Duncan into an all-pro.
Yeah.
Okay, he is here to help you allocate your resources in the offseason and take what he's been given and leaned on for his experience to decide, here's who I can work with, here's what I can do, here's the level that I could take. Like, he has probably gone in, okay? So here's how he's gone in. Because they build prospect profiles. We know that Bill Callahan stayed back a couple, I think, from the combine and stuff like that, to specifically work on prospect tape, prospect profiles, getting together what they need.
Yeah.
And there's an element of that, because everybody hears that and thinks, well, it's just, oh, that's just for the draft. No, I think it's for the whole thing. What do you need for this offensive system that we are building to work? And so that part of that is some self-scouting. So if he goes to Rand Carthon and says, hey, Rand, okay, here's what I got on Dylan Radins at right guard. We think he's a guard. Okay. Yep. Do with that what you will, but here's the level of play you can probably expect from Dylan Radins. Here's a best case scenario, actual scenario, worst case scenario, likely scenario. Then he turns around to over at right tackle, says, okay, we're going to have a competition at right tackle between Jalen Duncan and NPF. Go ahead and tell the media if you want to. But here it is. This all is coming from Bill Callahan, this guard, the right tackle. And he's saying likely scenario, best case scenario, likely scenario, worst case scenario. here's what you got in these guys. Do with this information as you please, because if he says in one of these things, NPF, average starter, Jalen Duncan, average starter, then you are going to push down right tackle down the board more than likely, or your need of position, and try to tackle these other positions like linebacker, defensive line, edge rusher, safety, depending on how you feel free agency is going, and move like that. So I think it's safe to say that this information you are getting, or that we are getting about right tackle and right guard and this offensive line, is coming from what they have talked to and leaned on from Bill Callahan, because that's what they have told you. So you can't sit here and say you can, but you shouldn't sit here on the radio or sit there on Twitter behind a keyboard or write in an article. Well, they're idiots if they think that NPF and Jalen Duncan can be a starting right tackle. That is what you signed Bill Callahan for, and Bill Callahan has more experience than you do. I'm going to lean Bill Callahan, and I'm also going to lean that I don't think that he thinks that they're all pro starters.
Yeah, there's also a weird thing where when Bill Callahan was first signed, a major talking point on Titans Twitter was, wow, what does this mean for the guys like Jalen Duncan and NPF and John Ojukwu and Dylan Radins and all this stuff? And now here we are weeks later, and it's like, oh, no, they're stupid if they ride with those guys. Like, where did things shift so much for the general consensus?
Oh, just all it takes is just one bad showing. I mean, that's what's happened to Olu Fashanu, right? Like Olu Fashanu, everybody clings to. He's never allowed a sack, but everybody clings to the Ohio State game because no prospect can ever have one bad game. So obviously, if you have a bad game and you're a prospect, you have a bad game, just hang up your cleats. Don't even play the rest of the year, because your draft stock doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that there's like 7 or 8 other games on your resume. It doesn't matter that you have an entire 2022 season. None of that matters. All that matters is that one game.
I might I'm going to speak my truth here. I'm going to speak my feelings here. I don't even think the Ohio State game was that bad. I watched it
yesterday. I found a video clip that's about 4.5 minutes long, but it's every pass blocking snap.
Okay.
From that game. And I see the 6 pressures that he allowed.
Yeah.
But that still wasn't that bad of a game.
I don't think so either. Like, just watching the tape, just the raw, like, press play and watch the whole game, I'm like, you know what? This kind of feels like people making a mountain out of a molehill with this prospect. And then the hand size thing too.
Where I feel like there was a missed assignment and communication issue between him and his guard, him and his tight end.
Yeah.
And that happens.
Yeah.
And I agree. And the Glory Day Sports puts it right here, which is a great podcast you were just on recently. The difference between Olu and Alt versus Ohio State is very small. And I think in terms of pass blocking, the difference between Alt and Olu is very small. And that takes us into our next topic, and the topic that will close us out. Hopefully Mike will show up at some point between now and then.
I do have something to add. I'm notorious for just adding stuff. But if
after the fact.
Yeah, after the fact.
Okay, so he wrote today an article that based off what our kind of discussion was heading into the week.
Yeah.
When we were talking in our group chat between me, you, and him, we were talking about this kind of same subject. And I don't think that the NFL, and it kind of stems from this. Tony Pauline, it doesn't really stem from this. We've kind of thought about this for a while now. But yesterday, I sent you what Tony Pauline said in his most recent article where he ranks his offensive linemen. Okay, so Tony Pauline, for those of you that may not know, he started up Pro Football Network. Anything that you see that's like really big information coming from pro days about what scouts think, about what teams think, about who's doing this, usually stems from a report that Tony Pauline writes, now currently over at Sportskeeda. So he is a pretty in-depth with scout community entrenched in there.
He's one of the good ones.
Yeah. He had an interesting line in his scouting report for Alt. And while there's a lot of love for him outside the scouting community, And then that's the big one. So let me say that again. While there's a lot of love for him outside the scouting community, Wiles makes it seem like the scouting community is kind of like, Alt's fine, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it finishes with, I believe Alt needs to really polish his game or he'll be exploited by quick, athletic pass rushers on Sunday. Okay. So I think we both agree. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. Alt is OT1.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that Mike feels the same way. But I don't think that the way I don't trust how recently Fashanu has fallen down the board. So I don't think, first off, I don't think between Alt and Fashanu is a wide gap, and I don't think the gap between Alt and maybe Fuaga and Latham, in between Fashanu's right in between there, is that big of a gap. But people are taking it to the extremes and think there is. And I kind of forgot. But what I was going to say is, like, I don't think the scouts are and I don't think teams have that big of a gap between Alt and whoever they may see as OT2. And
Their flavor.
Let me tell you something. There are some teams that may have Alt as OT2 and someone else is OT1. And I would venture to say that I don't think that the gap between if Alt is OT2 and another guy's OT1 is that big either. I just don't think there's that big a gap among maybe the first three offensive tackles. You could slide in Latham if you want to, but I don't think there's that many.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this kind of stuff was floating out there with Greg Cassell too. He got flamed for going on Buck's show and saying he didn't really like Joe Alt's tape, or maybe it was 3HL. I don't want to misappropriate there, but and the issue he's talking about with him firing with his hands, like, it's there on tape. It's just a matter of, like, does it really bother you or not? It's like I've seen a couple of people mention his anchor, like the mistiming of it. And how, it might make him susceptible to some of these speedy, twitchy, bendy guys in the NFL. Like, that's on tape. It's just a matter of what can you live with. I think the thing that makes Joe Alt OT1 for me is that he is a complete prospect. Now, he can be a very attractive prospect, a complete tackle prospect, and not really be, head and shoulders above the rest of the class as well, and may not be elite in any one thing. I like the RAS. I like the testing. He checks a lot of the boxes for me, but I'm also objective enough to hear the people that are connected to the scouting community, hear what they're saying, and, like, really listen to them, and hear the people that really grind tape and understand this, that kind of see some of the potential flaws with him, and in conjunction with the information, like, it was a few weeks ago that DJ said that Fuanga might be the first offensive tackle taken in this class. There's been some buzz with JC Latham and the Chargers at 5th overall. He might be the first tackle taken. It's really a matter of preference. For me, I like the complete prospect that Joe Alt is, but I look at this group as a whole, and I personally wouldn't have a gripe if any one of the four were the first offensive tackle taken in the draft.
Well, let's run through a scenario here, kind of like a what if scenario.
Okay.
And my question to you, and this is something that Braden kind of popped up on a football show with, and I'm going to try and word it in a better frame, and I'm going to frame it a little bit better, I think. Alt is gone. So let's say it goes quarterback, maybe a wide receiver. Let's say nobody trades back. It's very improbable nobody trades back, but let's do it. Okay. Quarterback, wide receiver, tackle, which is Joe Alt, wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
So that is 2 wide receivers off the board. Joe Alt is off the board. Would you rather take wide receiver 3 or trade back, get an extra day 2 pick, and take OT2?
Oh man, I'm trading back, and I think there's a good chance the way the dominoes fall that wide receiver 3 would probably be Rome Odunze. He's my number 1 player in this draft. I love him. Really fun to watch. Love the Devontae Adams comp, the Larry Fitzgerald comp. As tempting as that would be, the potential to add another pick in round 3 is too much to pass up for. It's a good draft to have round 3 and beyond picks. So I'm sliding back and I'm happy. I'm still happy with Fashanu. I still think he's a blue chip prospect. One of the best offensive linemen I've ever studied before. I'm not panicked about the Ohio State tape. I'm not panicked about the hand size. I'm cool with him. I'm cool with JC Latham. I'm cool with Talisi Fuanga as well. Any of those guys, and you can get them at, say, like 13, 14, 15, that range, and get another day 2 pick, then I'm on board with it. Let's roll.
Well, I want to touch on that because you just said you have Olu Fashanu as a blue chip prospect.
Yeah.
So even despite the deficiencies, I guess, for lack of a better term, in the run game, you still think he's you still think he's a blue chip prospect?
Yeah, I don't think his run blocking is terrible. I don't think he's a liability in run blocking at all. I think it's just been a consistency issue for him. And what I take issue with are the people that just say, well, he's not a run blocker. He can't run block. There's no power. And I'm watching his tape and I'm like, there's power there. I mean, maybe it's not on every play, but it's there for me, and I'm cool with it because in this day and age, as you know, run blocking and running the ball does not matter.
Doesn't fucking matter. Doesn't matter.
So he is elite pass protection. Elite pass
see,
protection.
that's what I have been arguing on Twitter when I posted yesterday at Stack in the Inbox talking about Joe Alt and how I don't think I do think that he is OT1, but I don't think that he is like levels above.
Same here.
He's a very clean prospect. He's about as clean a prospect as you're going to find in this draft.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where I'm at. Out of the offensive line, he's the cleanest prospect out of everybody. But I also think it's just a safe pick.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like, and I understand if you are the Titans at 7 and Alt is there, you draft Alt, and I understand it. But I also understand that's very safe. I also understand that he's such a safe prospect. There's a good chance he could go to the Chargers.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a good chance he could even go to the Giants, and maybe they do something silly like the Cardinals did with Paris Johnson, and they put him over at right tackle. That is a possibility. I don't know if I would agree with it. I think that is interesting. If you want to know what really would cause that domino to fall that way, in my opinion, I would venture to say that if the Cardinals trade back out of pick 4, that there's a chance that the Chargers turn around, take Alt, even if Marvin Harrison Jr. is on the board, even if Malik Neighbors on the board. I kind of get the feeling that they still may go Alt. There's a chance. I don't agree with that philosophy. But if that's going to be what they're going to do, right? If they are going to be a run first team, you get a run blocking. You get the best run blocker in this class, right? And a clean pass protector. You put him on the other side with Rashawn Slater, who, by the way, Rashawn Slater will be coming up on a second contract. You may not have to pay Rashawn Slater if you draft Joe Alt. So there is a possibility.
Oh, they've also talked about kicking him in at left guard until Slater's contract is up. So you just start him right away at left guard. And then once Slater moves on, you kick him out to tackle, and you've got that box checked for, years to come.
There you go. And then so that makes pick 9 or pick 7 a little bit more sexy especially for the Tennessee Titans. And in my mind, if you could trade back from 7, and I'm taking OT2 plus extra draft pick.
Yeah.
Every time. I'm going to take it. Because I am with you. I don't know if I think I'm more Fashanu's red chip player or purple chip player with blue chip tendencies, or red. That's a red chip, with blue chip traits. So purple chip. He may be a purple chip player, but he's very close to being a blue chip player in my book.
Yeah.
And I think what you pick up in day 3 or day 2 draft picks, maybe even a day 1 next year, depending on who you trade with, that it's a no-brainer. I think the people
Yeah.
that are, especially if Alt's gone, I'd be open to it if Alt is still there. I
Yeah.
don't think that that's how the Titans would view it. I think they would go Alt regardless, but that's kind of where I'm at. I am with you, and I know Mike agrees, but I am with you. There's not that much of a difference between Joe Alt, the prospect, and Olu Fashanu, the prospect. And this is where having Bill Callahan comes into play to provide you flexibility to be able to say, okay, Fashanu is great. And he's a great pass blocker. I don't have to do that. All I got to do is improve his run blocking. That's it?
Yeah.
That's all I got to do? Okay, well, sure, I could do that. I'm Bill fucking Callahan. If you don't think I can do that, what good am I? I'll retire tomorrow if I can't do that. And now you got extra picks. And I get the feeling from Rand Carthon's words that he wants to find more picks somewhere in this draft. And now they've traded away, or they had traded away another 3rd round pick next year. So they may be open to picking up a 3rd round pick next year in the midst of all this as well. So at some point, they want to move back. And I think that we're both I am team Alt, but team trade back, even with Alt on the board, is like, it's like right there. It's right there. I talk myself into, but I'm like that every year. I'm always team trade back at some point. By the end of the time draft comes down, I'm team trade back.
I'm team trade back, even if Alt is there, to be honest with you, just because I love how deep this tackle class is. I think you can get a starting left tackle at 38 if you want to. I've established I'm a big fan of Patrick Paul. I've also come around on Kingsley Suamataia, whatever it is, out of BYU. I like his tape quite a bit. I think there are guys that you can get to check that box, but this is a draft where there's kind of to me, there's a wide gap. It's a good year to have a top 15 pick, and it's a good year to have a lot of day 3 picks. And so I think you kind of want to lean into where the strengths of this draft are. And for the Titans, it's get more of those round 3 and beyond picks. And so if you could pick up 2 picks this year, if you could pick up a pick this year and get that 3rd back for next year, man, you're dealing. And I will take, I've said it over and over, I will take 3 red chip players over a blue chip player for where this Titans organization is at right now. As we sit here in April of 2024, I will take 3 red chip players over 1 blue chip player any day of the week.
You got to find youth at several positions and quality youth at several positions. They have, because they have failed to do that. And Ren Carthon has shown a pretty good eye for being able to do that in the draft. We'll see if that continues and everything. Because I mean, you gotta pay them as well.
Yeah, sure.
But they're the key. They're so few and far between, right? You're talking about Skoronski, potentially Will Levis. Will Levis will get you through the next few years, but we'll see what he could do beyond that. Sure. You're talking about Tyjae Spears, who may only be able to give you, he's a running back, he may only be able to give you a few more years. Maybe Chig, definitely Roger McCreary, but you only got 2 years left of Roger McCreary. Jeffrey Simmons, you got him for a while. So that's kind of where you're at, right? Like, you're kind of at, you have to find youth through the draft to be able to keep on not having to overpay or spend a lot of money in free agency. That's what successful teams do. They build through the draft. And we talk about it all the time. Being able to trade and pick up young players. I mean, if you traded, you let's say you pick up and you trade with the Bears. You go from 7th to 9th. Even if Alt's there, there's a good chance that Alt could be there at 9. But you picked up a day 3 pick. Right? Like the Bears are trading up for a wide receiver. Well, now I could either have Alt at 9, or I could have Olu Fashanu at 9 if Alt has already been gone. And I got a day 3 pick. Or I got a round 3 pick. Sorry, round 3 pick. So I got now round 2, round 3. I'm good to go on the next day of the draft. And maybe I could trade down from round 2 as well and pick up some extra picks, later round 2, maybe another 3rd or 4th. and you're still working. So
Yeah.
I look at it from a perspective of what's the best way to build a team, not what is the best way to fill one position.
Yeah.
And I think that's where everybody gets lost. And I understand why they get lost in the weeds and that, because you're talking about having to go through the last 2 years at left tackle was atrocious. But it is all about building a sustainable competing team, and you need players that make you a sustainable competing team, and you need good young players that do that as well. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like I've already just talked myself into fuck all. Let's just trade back to no matter what. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I'm at. That's how good teams do it.
Well, I think Joe Alt would be a very fine addition to this Titans organization. But
Right.
what does drafting Joe Alt do for your middle linebacker spot? What does it do for your defensive line depth, your edge rusher? Like, these are decisions that the Titans are going to have to make, because right now they only have that 38th overall pick on day 2. And if you want to get real hairy, I wouldn't mind trading out of 7. I wouldn't mind trading out of 38 as well. So, but you're looking at right now as it stands, they've got to choose on that day 2 with the plethora of decent. There's going to be a good player there at 38. It's like, well, do we get the defensive end, the Danico Autry role if Darius Robinson is still there? Do we add Tavondre Sweat and beef up the defensive line? Do we reach for our middle linebacker, because we need an inside linebacker right now? And a starting caliber guy might not be there in the 4th round. Like, these are decisions that are going to get awfully muddy if they don't accrue more picks. But if you get that 3rd round pick, it's like, okay, let's take linebacker off the board at 38, because we know we can get a guy that's going to be capable in the 3rd round. So I think getting more picks simplifies their decision making each round as well.
Derek is not a fan of this conversation. He's taking it to an extreme that we're talking about that the Titans should take Harrison Mevis at 7, which is
the thicker kicker.
Is a far cry from what the actual conversation is. I mean, that is a hyperbole. I have to respect it. That is hyperbole at its finest to try to make a point that it's alt or nothing, which is not how the Tennessee Titans view the draft, or any good NFL team views the draft in any respect, right? It's not you have to do this or you need to do this. If you draft for need, you're drafting for another team later on, because, or probably working for another team and somewhere and some other thing. That's coming from people that know the business far more than us. You take the best player available, but you don't have to do anything. You don't need to do anything when you get into that stuff. So I am alt OT1, but I am also fully objective and understanding that if alt is not there, or if they choose to trade back to accrue more picks, that is probably what is best for the Tennessee Titans down the road. And again, I'm with Jack Ripper here. It's not Joe Alt or bust.
Yep.
We got to fill multiple holes, and sometimes it takes by trading back. And look, that is the reality of the situation. Those who want to say that it's only one thing, that's fine. That's your prerogative, but you have to understand that's not how the NFL works. It's not only just one thing. There are many scenarios and many possibilities.
And I think you might be disappointed on draft night if you're hitching your wagon to alt or nothing.
Yeah, you can't hitch your wagon to one player. Like, you just can't. You're just setting yourself up to just jinx yourself, is how I kind of view it. You just jinx yourself, right? You're setting yourself up to be hurt, because if they don't, it takes multiple men to fill multiple holes. Chef Ran right there.
Chef Ran's been on one today too. Chef Ran and Easton.
But I will have to say that, like, you can't pigeonhole yourself and to just put all your emotional and mental capacity behind one player, because you are going to be disappointed, because there's so many scenarios that could play out on draft night. Well, before we get to your last topic, before we get off of here, Josh Gregory asks, I think is a good question, how far down do you think you could trade back and still get Olu or Fuaga? And I would personally say probably around the I wouldn't go past, I'm not comfortable going past 14. Because I think the Colts are 15. So I whatever picks right before the Colts is about my threshold, because Colts are going to trade with there, are my threshold for trading back and still being able to get what you want.
I wouldn't want to test it too much, particularly in Fuanga's case, because it sounds like, smart people kind of think that he might go a little higher than anticipated. Fashanu may fall, but I'm still like I'm so just completely perplexed by his slide in the last month that I just don't know if any of it's real. Like I kind of feel like he might still be a top 10 player as well. So I wouldn't want to risk it too much. Lucky number 13 is about as far as I'd go in terms of being comfortable.
Yeah. And I think that I'm with you. I think both and I think Drake May and Fashanu are like the biggest victims of overanalyze. And this is the point that Derek was trying to make. So I misunderstood his point. But I think that Drake May and Fashanu are the biggest victims of analysts trying to poke holes in every player. And everybody's trying to talk themselves out of players that they've already have said, like you had said with Fashanu, he would have been the best OT out of last year's draft class, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
He was at some point he was OT1, and then here comes Joe Alt and all this stuff. So, like to me, I'm with you in the fact that I think Drake May's going quarterback 2. I think he's the quarterback 2 in the NFL's eyes, QB2. And I think that Fashanu is OT2 in the NFL's eyes for the most part, in the majority. And there are some flexible, different style of taste, if you will, different taste buds in the NFL. But I think if you were doing the majority of the NFL surveying them, QB2 Drake May, OT2 Olu Fashanu.
Yeah, I don't want to drop a bomb on here when we're trying to get out of here, but I just want to, I just want to hold my hand up and say some of us have been low on Drake May ever since last summer. You can read my initial eval on Stacking the Inbox.
Ryan Tannehill.
I said he's Ryan Tannehill. Yeah. So I'm really surprised that nobody's kind of like tried to drag me down into the mud over that so far, but
You're asking for it now.
I'm asking for it now. Yeah.
You listeners, you viewers, go on to at Stoney Keeley on X on Twitter and just let him have it.
Yeah. Don't watch the NC State game where he didn't even complete a pass until the second half of the game and they just beat the shit out of him. Don't watch that if you want to maintain this Drake May QB2 illusion. Well, I'll say this. I do think he will be the second quarterback drafted. But
I'm with you. I mean, I just think that's where it's at. Now, that doesn't say much about his prospects where a player is drafted.
Yeah.
Because he could be I just think he's better than Jaden Daniels, and I think he's better than the rest of the group. So what is your one more thing? So
I thought
one more thing, a new recurrent segment.
I did have a nice little zinger in there about Rand talking about his relationships and how he uses that to get deals done. But apparently everybody locally said that he's just an awkward dude that nobody knows what he does and all that stuff. So we're just reiterating that. But I thought Rand dropped a really juicy nugget about the green dot linebacker in his press conference. So he mentioned Fred Warner. When they drafted him, he wore the green dot his rookie season, kind of alluding to the fact that maybe, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they may be able to find a guy that can wear the green dot. Like maybe he's just not on the roster right now just yet. But then also adding to it that it doesn't have to be a linebacker that wears the green dot. So layered questions here, starting with like anybody on the roster right now that may not be a linebacker that you would feel comfortable wearing the green dot.
I'm going to go with a left field answer.
Okay.
Because based on how it is constructed right now, okay?
I wonder if we're going to go in the same spot here.
Elijah Molden can wear the green dot.
We're not.
Okay. Monty Hooker could, but I think Elijah Molden is one of the big things about him coming out of the draft was how much his football IQ was. And right now, he's your starting opposite safety. So he's out on the field as it stands right now. So I'm going to put the green dot on Elijah Molden as it stands on April 3rd, 2024. Elijah Molden's your green dot guy.
I'm looking at the slot with Roger McCreary. I mean, he's another guy.
He's not on the field enough. So when he comes off the field, who's it going to be?
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, because Yeah, you might have something there with Elijah Molden. Yeah, I just wondered because McCreary's another guy that is like really
Yeah.
good, really savvy from the neck up, communicative, understands his role pretty well, and I don't know. Like I just you're right. He's not on the field for as long as it would take to really be that guy. But
And Hooker's got injury issues.
Hooker,
That's my concern. So technically, let's say this: you could start with Hooker, right? And when he gets injured, as it stands on April 3rd, you get Hooker, and then if he gets injured, it'd be Elijah Molden.
yeah. Could you put it on Jeff? Could you put it on Jeffrey Simmons?
I don't know. It'd be a lot of cussing, probably. I don't know how good that's gonna go.
But my second question was
Yeah.
pertaining to the Fred Warner thing. Looking from a traits perspective, I looked at Fred Warner had a 9.67 RAS. I love RAS myself. I'm a big fan. Similar prospects in this draft class. You have Peyton Wilson had a 9.81, Trevin Wallace at 9.54, Edifwan Ulufosio at 9.66. Any of those guys kind of do it for you, as you know, maybe you draft him for the traits and maybe he turns into a Fred Warner?
I think there's a lot of guys that could do it. Now, listen, Fred Warner was drafted in round 3. I'm
Mhm.
sure they would have no problem with Dre Greenlaw, who's drafted after round 3, if I'm not mistaken. I think round 5.
Yeah.
Wearing the green dot if necessary. They've
Mhm.
also trusted green dot stuff to Azeez Al-Shaair, just not in not only in Tennessee, but also last year or previous years in San Francisco when he had to come in and play. So I think there are guys. So like, I think the guy that stands out for me is probably Jordan McGee as
Sure.
far as putting together the traits, the tape, and the value,
Value.
right? So
Mhm.
draft value. So I'm putting those three things together: the traits, the tape, and the value. I like Jordan McGee. Maggie, I don't know how to pronounce it. I should learn. I also would be fine with Trevin Wallace and Edufon Ulufusio. Peyton Wilson kind of scares me because of his injury history, but I really love Peyton Wilson. But then you're probably gonna have to draft him at 38 if you
That's the
don't
thing.
move back.
Yeah.
The value gets me there. Edrin Cooper, I think we're both on the same page with Edrin Cooper in the sense that
Pass.
he just runs. He's just Kenneth Murray. He just
Yeah.
runs around with like a
Kenneth
chicken with
Murray
his
to
head
me.
cut off.
Yeah.
Curtis Jacobs and Cedric Gray are other guys, but they just don't do it for me like those other guys. Like I feel like Edufana Luofosho, Jordan McGee, and Trevin Wallace are just, for some reason, it's just there's something about those 3 guys that I feel like, okay, I see them being, I see them being at worst Azeez Al-Shaair,
Yeah.
which is a good thing to have. And I'm talking about their ceiling. At
Yeah.
worst, their ceiling is Azeez Al-Shaair, which is fine. But really, they could all be a Fred Warner. You just never know with these linebackers. And I feel
Sure.
like they are being very devalued. Another guy I'll throw out there is a guy that I think they should take a flyer on if he's there in like the 7th round. Obviously, not for starting purposes. Please fill your linebacker position before the 7th round. But that guy would be Nathaniel Watson or
Yeah.
Tyrese Knight, actually, too. I would put both those guys in that competition to possibly be the 3rd linebacker behind those 2 guys.
Yeah, I think Peyton Wilson is probably the closest thing to Fred Warner in this linebacker class. It's just going to be too rich for my blood because as things stand right now, I think they'd have to take 38 or they'd have to take him at 38 to get him. And I don't know, man. Like I kind of cringe with all the holes that this team has. I don't think they're in a position to take the best linebacker in the class at 38 there. I'm kind of starting to get on board with Ulufosio a little more after watching a little more of him. He's a little more physical. I think he's a little more polished from the neck up than Trevin Wallace, who has all the traits but is not the most diagnostic player, if you will. Had a good Senior Bowl, but I'm kind of thinking like Ulufosio is the one guy that if you look at the athletic testing, if you look at the value, I think he's a solid day 3 guy. I think I'd be willing to roll the dice on him more than anybody else as far as like turning into rookie green dot wearing linebacker. Like, again, like we're talking about with Jalen Duncan and NPF, like worst case scenario, your day 3 linebacker has to end up starting and wearing the green dot for you, who has the traits to hit on their ceiling a little bit more. And I think I'm getting on board with Ulafosio.
Yeah, I like Ulofoshio. Jeremiah Trotter is an interesting name to throw out there because he's kind of lingering in
Sure.
that 4th round, 3rd
Yeah.
round, and he's
Yeah.
got really high stable metrics on his stuff. I haven't watched a lot of Jeremiah Trotter yet, and I'm trying to get to that here soon.
He's good.
But he's a guy that could be that. The guys I'm out on are the Ohio State guys and Notre Dame guys. I'm out on all of them. There's nothing about them that I can cling to that I really like. I love Junior Colson.
Me too.
I am all in on Junior Colson, but it's just hard without extra picks. It's just really hard to stomach the idea of drafting Junior Colson at 38. But I could be easily talked into being happy. But I really love some Junior Colson. And out of the premier, I guess, linebackers in this class, if you can use that to describe the linebackers class, but the premier linebackers, Junior Colson's my favorite. I like him better than Peyton Wilson. I like him better than Edgerrin Cooper because I feel like he's reliable. He's sturdy. He knows what he's doing. He's super smart. I'm a big Junior Colson guy.
You and me both.
Well, okay. Someone asked what Jordan last name, how to spell Jordan's last name is Magee. He's a linebacker out of Temple. If you want to go, I think it was Chef Rand was asking so he could go watch some tape. That is who that is. Big believer in some Jordan Maggie or McGee. I'm assuming McGee. I just need to say McGee. I got to commit. Commit to McGee. McGee and me is how we're going to remember it. Stoney, tell everybody what's coming up on Film Friday, if you already know, and we got some coming up on some of your draft notebooks that I have yet to publish.
Oh yeah, Film Friday. The people are gonna love it this week. I'm doing Dallas Turner, baby. We're gonna talk.
Oh man, they're gonna eat it up
on Film Friday. My draft notebooks. We've got the linebacker issue up already. I'm getting a little deeper into the offensive line. We're getting really deep into the offensive line class at this point. I think I've got 30 offensive linemen on my big board right now. So we're talking like Jacob Monk and Ethan Driscoll on this upcoming one. And then finally getting around to Keon Coleman and Troy Franklin, along with some of the safeties, the Utah guys I've watched. I've kind of got Cole Bishop soaring up my draft board after watching him a little more. And then Tyler Nubin, who I think is, one of the premier safeties, one of the few safeties that's worth taking with a day 2 pick right now. So catching up on a lot of the top 50 guys that I've missed out and watching all these, backup centers and third tackles and everything to build out my offensive line rankings. So catching up on that. Dallas Turner, Film Friday. I've been writing a lot about WrestleMania this week on Sobros Network. So if you're into that, go check that out. It's just, like, my hair's on fire right now. So I can't even tell you what I had for breakfast this morning.
I think everybody, for whatever reason, and it's not just extend to us, it extends to a lot of people. Those of us that cover the draft as extensively as we do, Justin Mello falls into this because he does like 100. He's up to 160 something prospect interviews for the Draft Network.
Hardworking man.
We are all fucking exhausted. I don't know what it is about this draft season in particular that has drained us. Because last year I was cruising and all this kind of stuff.
I started earlier this year.
We all were, but something about this year has just has destroyed all of us that are covered. Like we're so ready for the draft to be here and be over, and I cannot wait.
3 more weeks.
StackingTheInbox.com, parkarowski.com. Go and make sure you subscribe to all that. Make sure you also subscribe to the Bluegrass Beverages newsletter. Go get you some tickets for our draft party, which is going to be awesome. Free food, free drinks. Well, sort of free. All the money goes to a charity. So it's not like anybody's profiting except for kids who are neglected and all that kind of stuff. So it's our kids of Nashville, Tennessee. So make sure that you help out the kids. Do it for the kids.
That's right.
And make sure that you also buy your drinks and all your alcohol from Bluegrass Beverages. Unfortunately, Mike is a loser, and he did not show up at all, even though he has the link to show up. He has not shown up at all, even though this was his designated time that we planned on at 1 p.m. a couple of days ago. So he missed the season premiere, the first episode. So you'll have to catch Mike Herndon's writings over at podcarsky.com if you want to get his opinion on everything we discussed in the last half of this show. And then, of course, we'll be back next Wednesday, 1 p.m. We are going to try and stick to a schedule of 1 p.m. Central Standard Time every Wednesday. So make sure that you guys tune in. Thank you guys for joining us. Bluegrass Beverages, Hendersonville, Tennessee. I'm Zach at FWordsPod on X, StackingInbox.com. He's Stoney, SoBrosNetwork.com, StackingInbox.com, at Stoney Keeley on X. This has been Football and Other F Words, and you have just been effed.